86. And I think it's true to say that I'm still learning to do the job well 37 years later. I think that classes of teenagers tend to be large classes. You may have, for example, a private one-to-one class or a small group, but generally, I think that most of us teach groups of teenagers that are somewhere between 15 and maybe 35, maybe even more. Um, and in my experience, one of the hardest parts of teaching teenagers, especially in those large classes, is keeping everybody involved, engaged, motivated, interested, and making progress. Next Tuesday, on the 14th of November, I'll be part of a special event where we're talking about involving, engaging all of our students. And the subtitle of my talk is Mission Impossible. Why is it potentially mission impossible to engage each and every student in our class? Well, I think it's very simple to explain. If we have a class of 20, 25, 30 students, there are 30 students, but only one teacher. So unless you can multiply yourself, unless you can clone yourself, that problem is not really going to go away. But I do think that there are lots of practical things that we can do to make sure that we do, in the end, reach each and every one of our students. And I'll be explaining some of those ideas next week, next Tuesday. But for the moment, here are just some very simple, basic ideas to make sure that we can engage each student. Let's start with two of the most basic ideas ever. The first one is so obvious, but it's really important, is to make sure that you know each student's name and you use their names. And I really think that when the students come into your class saying, hello, Natalia, how's it going, Ivan? How was your exam yesterday, Juan? That just naming people makes sure that people realize, the students realize that they count and that you know who they are and that you are interested in them. Another really basic idea is simply when we're doing feedback, naming students, but in a totally random order around the class. And that means that each student needs to be paying attention to you to make sure they know when it is their turn to actually answer your questions. So if we go in a strict order, one by one, students sort of switch off. But if we're going in a random order, then everybody is paying attention to you and they're listening to you. So that is obviously very, very basic. The next thing to do is to find out as much as you can about each individual student in your class. Now, at the beginning of the year, we often do day one activities, icebreakers, getting to know you activities. If you're interested in knowing more day one activities, getting to know you activities, please look at my Facebook page, Teach with Dave, where there are lots of activities that I've suggested there in the past. But basically, by doing getting to know you activities, the students are learning about each other, but possibly even more importantly, you are finding out about them, finding out about their personalities. And I think that really, in the end, great teachers have this ability to find out about the personalities of their students and also to find out about their moods. And in each class, we're trying to decide who needs a boost to their confidence, who needs to be put a little bit under, like with a firm hand, who needs to be corrected and who does not want to be corrected. And I think the real key maybe to great teaching is trying to be aware of each student and what they need at a particular moment. Now, obviously, each student is different. Each student needs different things. And that, I think, brings us to the question also of mixed abilities. Notice that I always say the expression mixed abilities in the plural, not mixed ability. I don't really believe that students are good or bad at everything in English. I think each student has their strengths and their weaknesses. So some students are great at speaking, but less good at grammar. Some are good at listening, but not so good at writing. And I think that the key for us as teachers is to then provide variety in our classes. We need variety of task types. We need variety of texts, of topics. And my suggestion would be, when we've finished planning our lesson, have a quick look and see if we've got some variety in there. Have we got variety of interaction, pairs, whole group? Have we got variety of, for example, pace and intensity? And I think that because each student is different, we need to provide that variety so that each student then can adapt and be comfortable within the space of our, for example, 50-minute lesson. Now, of course, one typical way that mixed abilities makes itself clear in the classroom is the speed that students work at. Some students finish a task really quickly and well. Some students are still just beginning when others have finished. And for me, one of the ways to make sure we engage every student is to think about fast finishers. So, for example, we can provide worksheets, we can provide different activities for fast finishers to do. One of my favorite simple ideas is to have a word game. For those students who finish an activity earlier, we give them a word game. For example, on the board, we write a long word in English. I used to call this game Constantinople when I was a boy. You write the word Constantinople, encyclopedia, any long word in English. And when a student finishes an activity fast and well, then you ask that student to look at the word on the board and to make as many words as possible with the letters in that word. A very simple activity, but it's one that meanwhile keeps the fast finishers busy, and it gives the slower students time to finish the core activity that you want them to do. I think other key areas that we need to work on and that we look at in the session next week on the 14th of November is the whole idea of personalization and creativity. Our students are not empty vessels when they walk into the classroom. They are students with experiences, ideas, opinions, wishes. And I think that when we're doing even something as simple as grammar activities, we need to involve the whole student. We need to give them activities where they can bring some of their personality to the activity. Let's imagine we're doing the second conditional. What a great activity if we say, okay, so what would you do if you arrived at school and you realized that you were still wearing your slippers? We're practicing the second conditional, but we're getting the students to bring something unique to the activity. What do they think? What ideas do they have? Some of their ideas will be very funny. Some will be very silly. Some may be less interesting. Maybe some students don't have much idea at all. And I suppose that's the point. When we're teaching a class of 25 students, we have all of this. We've got so many different individuals there in the classroom. And the last thing that I want to say today is the first thing that I'm going to say next week in my session about involving students. Teaching 25 students is challenging. It can be tiring, it can be difficult. But at the end of the day, I think that the reason why I still love teaching after 37 years is because I love, in inverted commas, the problem. Imagine a class where every student was the same. And imagine a situation where every year your students were all the same every year, year after year. The reason why I love teaching is because we have this mixture in our classes. Each student has their own weaknesses, their strengths, their interests, their hobbies, their personality. And yes, they can be funny, they can be interesting. Sometimes, of course, they can be annoying. But actually, that is part of the whole situation. I suppose Shakespeare would say part of the rich tapestry of life. So basically, if you enjoy the challenge of teaching teenagers, and if you're interested in finding out more ideas about involving and engaging all your students, then please join myself and my fellow speakers next Tuesday, the 14th of November, for a special Engaging Teens Day webinar. Thanks for joining me today for this coffee, and yeah, hope to see you next week. Goodbye.